Alrighty, this podcast may contain language not appropriate for children. So if you wanted to have a discussion about, brutal monsters who are slaying each other with firebolts and deadly claws, that would be a bit more child-friendly. You might have to look for another podcast, basically.
So keep your R box at home, kids.
So that was I had that moment when I read that. I was like, oh, so that's the panel you're talking about. Okay. The infamous one.
There we go. Suppose that's as good of a start as any. So, how about that trailer? My good friend Emma asked me, when did they make the new Pokemon professors so sexy? To which I responded, they've always been sexy. Do you not remember how many people thirsted over Professor Sycamore and Juniper when those two were revealed?
I mean, to be honest, they're very devious in that we've got two hot Pokemon professors and making them version exclusive. Many accusations of biphobia on the TL.
Oh boy. I mean, where's the lie though?
I've got to say, I think I have a connection issue, and I basically joined in on Pokemon professors were sexy. It was a great line to drop in on the chat, whereas before you were totally quiet for me.
I'll be honest, the male professor, what's his name? Professor
Chadface.
That's a straight dude. I can understand how that might look appealing in theory, but I'm having a hard time getting past the weird skin suit he's got under the lab coat. That's also a very interesting little pattern we've seen with a number of Pokemon professors. Like, Professor Kukui was just like tits out underneath that lab coat, and then Sonia is going full e-girl fashion. And I guess it's all fine because it's just underneath a lab coat.
I'm just looking at it. I didn't know that Toby Fox composed more music for it. He composed the field music for it, apparently.
Oh, really? Interesting.
After creating a concept sketch, Game Freak arranged so many versions that you'll hear throughout the game. Looking forward to more leitmotifs from the leitmotif master.
It was interesting playing through Sword and Shield and then playing the Battle Tower, and then seeing a very distinct difference between the two different musical styles. I think the fact that it sounded like he was still using the same sort of Super Nintendo instrumentation that he did with Undertale.
It is definitely quite striking, you compare kind of the work he does for Game Freak, because he also did Little Town Hero, and it's always very strong, but you could tell he's more in his element when composing for games that he is developing himself.
I think that is a fair assessment.
I think making him compose the field theme is a much better choice than having him do a battle theme that has to really fit into that Game Freak music that is very distinct itself.
Pokemon music tends to be geared towards being able to loop. I do think it was an interesting thing where I imagine the main incentive for bringing him on was ooh, we should make him do the Battle Tower theme because he did the one Megalovania song. That's the one song everyone knows, so I think we should get him for that. When honestly, the Undertale and Deltarune tracks that I've enjoyed a lot more were, as you mentioned, Wensleydale, those field tracks, because those tend to have you tend to be able to make those things a little bit longer and a little bit more complex, since you don't have to worry about looping them.
With a game that he is composing all the soundtrack to, he's able to work in, like we said, recurring motifs. What makes the battle themes work great in his games, part of it, is the fact that he's able to bring back motifs from earlier to tell you something about the battle, the stakes of the battle, or the character, which is not something you can as easily do if you're just composing scatterings of tracks.
Yes.
Honestly, they should just bring him in for another mystery dungeon game. That would be probably for the best.
Oh my god. That is a game that did some leitmotifs.
Oh yes, in the vast kind of break between the introductory episode and this one, Wensleydale and I did play through all of Explorers of the Sky and had a rather great time.
Oh yeah, we've managed to play through the entirety of it. Remember, I managed to get the bloody volumes in through the order that was quite delayed. Anyway, we should probably talk about manga.
Yes, let us talk about the actual source of this podcast and not us thirsting over newly announced Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Pokemon professors.
Welcome Welcome, dear all, to Podcastmon Adventures. We are a retrospective podcast aiming to discuss the Pokemon Adventures manga, also known as Pokemon Special, arc by arc. So today, in our little book club, we're gonna chat about the first arc of the series based on the games Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue. The arc spans over chapters 1 through 40 of the series, or very conveniently for us, through the entire first Omnibus Collector's Edition. If you'd like to know more about our Pokemon journeys, our feelings on the franchise as a whole, a while ago we recorded an introductory episode to the manga that we're going to be talking about, so do check that out, it's highly recommended. But if you'd like to start with this episode, no worries, some short introductions are in order either way. So I'm Wensleydale Cheddar, they, them, and what about you two? Who are you? Are you a boy or a girl? And what do you do on the internet?
My name is Dr. Hoven. I'm he, him. I tweet about manga and video games and very occasionally podcast.
I'd tell you to go watch my World Trigger video, but if that video interested you in World Trigger, or if you're already a fan, please read along with Duckface Diaries, the World Trigger read-through podcast that myself and Wensleydale do, where we tackle the World Trigger manga volume by volume.
I am Henry Kathman, he, him as well, and I do too many things, arguably, on the internet, from making nearly 3-hour-long video essays to other podcasts about Barbie to writing whole tabletop RPG systems, and I find myself a slave to the arts, my passions driving me towards the most ludicrous lengths. Pokemon Adventures, or Pokemon Special. I do not envy the ordeal that you two had to go through in order to be able to actually accrue this manga, because as a filthy American, it is pretty easy to get my hands on a lot of this stuff through, especially now that Viz Media is doing these really nice collector's editions that just compile entire arcs into just a single volume.
Yeah, that's what I got, the omnibuses as well.
Those are very nice, I must say, but boy howdy, getting your hands on a lot of these later issues it's a bit, but not so much for this first one.
Between the two of us, we own the whole series.
Yeah. Being able to just casually talk about this manga is such a nice change of pace from so much of the other stuff, because, ladies and gentlemen and others, I have some thoughts, TM, and I'm not the one who has to edit this, so I am unrestricted. I apologize in advance, Wensleydale.
Oh boy, I'm bracing myself for another 3-hour recording.
For the sake of your sanity, Wensleydale, I will try to tamper that somewhat for your sake.
Alright, so today we are talking about the Red, Green, and Blue arc, as we said, and so as our resident newbie to the series, Hoven, how would you describe the plot of Red, Green, and Blue? What is this story about, and how did you find it?
Well, the story follows Red, a young boy from Pallet Town and a relative natural at catching the weakling Pokemon in the area. And after a chance encounter with the legendary Pokemon Mew and an aloof, cocky trainer with more experience than him named Blue, Red realizes that he has more to learn as a trainer and sets out to tackle the Kanto League Challenge. Along the way, he gets swept up in the thwarting the unethical Pokemon wrestling and experimentation orchestrated by the sinister Team Rocket, a conflict that has the region's gym leaders split down the middle. He also meets other colourful characters on his travels, such as the swindler thief Green and hillbilly science man who has a tendency to reenact the horror classics The Fly, Bill.
Not to mention Dr. Avila Moreau. Let's not forget that.
Throughout the story, Red's boundless compassion, ingenuity, and kindness for others is put to the test, culminating in an epic clash in Saffron City. And then another climax happens, and another one, and then another one. Red just can't catch a break.
So many climaxes.
So many climaxes with these new hot professors. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
So yeah, Wensleydale often described this manga to me as being a lot like the Shonen Jump series Undead Unluck and, popular other battle series 7 Deadly Sins, in that it never really stops. And I found this to be sort of the case. It's highly condensed, but for the first 2/3 it does follow a very episodic structure, where the longer arcs tend towards about 3 or 4 chapters. But in the last third, it definitely kind of coagulates somewhat.
Yes, I'm definitely inclined to agree with that. I think something that does bear mentioning with the red, blue, green arcs of this is that this was being published around the same time as the initial release of Pokemon Green and Red in Japan. The first volume came out in 1995 and went all the way up through 1998. So I think something that we saw in this is the sort of challenge that writer Hidenori
Kusaka.
Yeah, Kusaka. Thank you. We were seeing the different challenges that Hidenori Kusaka was having to face when taking when you get down to it, relatively simplistic role-playing game story and trying to expand it to something that could be properly published over the span over different manga releases. And I definitely agree that the first 2/3 of this follows a lot of that same episodic structure of let's take this vignette from the game and try to make a narrative out of it, and then by the end having to deal with the potential quandary of we don't know when the next one of these games is coming out and what's going to be happening there, so we should try to think of a way to conclude the narrative in a satisfactory way, which is why you get just all the different climaxes, so many different ways of just concluding things.
Yeah, it's like the main arc of Red, it kind of builds really nicely to the big clash in Saffron City, which feels like the culmination of everything and a really satisfying payoff. And then there's 3 additional climaxes, all of which are nice and have a lot of things I like in them, but are not built up to as well, because you can tell that they are trying to rattle them off.
It is kind of a trend in the writing of the series that denouement is not a card in Kusaka's deck. It never offers much of a resolution, but rather moves on to the next big thing afterwards.
If I had to speculate, I imagine this came out of Saffron City being the main intended climax, and then having to deal with the obligation of having to adapt the final remaining story beats of the game, such as the confrontation in Viridian City, the Indigo League, as well as the potential buildup of the Elite Four. I'm not sure what Nintendo's policy was when it came to the publication of this manga but at least during this first third, you almost get the impression that they weren't 100% sure how long this manga was going to be going, because again, this was being published during the very early life of Pokemon as a series before it fully became the giant cultural juggernaut that we know it as today.
From these last few climaxes, I would say that you could easily cut the Mewtwo stuff out and have it take place fully in the Yellow arc, which we'll get to next time. But
believe me, we will get to that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are things I do like about the Mewtwo arc and how it ties things up for Red, but yeah, it does feel like the least necessary of the set.
Yeah, we should probably talk about our general thoughts on the series, but before we go into specifics.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say that I'm really happy after reading this series. It definitely holds up much better than I expected. So I guess you could say that this manga is special in my heart. I'm always surprised by how much creativity, pathos, and humor and just personality this story has. It tries to do so much more than just a regular tie-in comic would need to do. On top of introducing the audience to the world and the game elements and creating inventive scenarios with different Pokemon species, it creates a thrilling story that always finds me wanting to skip over from one chapter to the next rather than stop and take notes. So it was quite a struggle to do the notes for this podcast initially, but it was a great experience reading this.
And to give it some credit for how it works within its own limitations, I think it does a lot of really smart storytelling decisions with what it's given. For example, how it uses the gym leaders, in that, like, okay, you have the most distinctive sprite designs in the game, how can you keep them in the story more often? And you kind of have that idea of, oh, well, Giovanni is a gym leader, so why wouldn't he also conscript other gym leaders into his ranks? You also have stuff like the Henry mentioned, the foreshadowing of the Elite Four, in that just kind of cramming the Elite Four into this arc would not make for a very satisfying conclusion. So you get to hold them off, assumably for the Yellow arc, and actually have the resolution be about the rivalries that we've had ongoing for the whole series.
This is a manga that people tend to hold, even if they are not avid manga readers and very casually into Pokemon Adventures as a story. This is the arc that most people tend to think about, because I think for a lot of Americans especially, we've had the advantage of having this sucker re-released 50 times, and I've read the arc of this, the Red arc, probably dozens of times over these past couple of decades since I first discovered it. And I agree with you, Wensleydale, when you said, the level of efficiency in a lot of this storytelling, despite being condensed into only 10 chapters, it is kind of remarkable how much they were able to fit within that short amount of page space. They were able to get across all of these different characters and being able to introduce a lot of the key mechanics and ideas of the Pokemon world in a way that is pretty easy to understand. I know we don't want to make too many comparisons to the anime, since that is its whole other beast with its own other set of expectations and guidelines, but I think something that you tend to see in Pokemon discussions, especially when discussing serialized adaptations, is that people heavily use the Red arc especially as sort of a dig against the anime, usually talking about this almost mythologized version of Red who is so much better than that stupid Ash Ketchum. But I think when people make those kinds of dismissive arguments, it usually ignores a common thread that binds both the manga and the anime, and that fundamentally both of these stories are trying to not only serve as their own compelling individual narratives, but they are also meant to serve as something akin to an education tool, as a tie-in. Both the anime and the manga had to theoretically serve as someone's potential introduction to Pokemon as a concept. Because of that, you have to be able to take mechanics that, if we're going to be honest, would be kind of hard to understand as 4 or 5-year-olds, who is the main target audience of Pokemon, and being able to communicate it in a manner that would be pretty easy to understand. And the fact that both the anime and the manga were able to translate these things into, I would argue, pretty decent stories, and being able to translate what was a very, very simple RPG into this larger sprawling narrative, considering how the Game Boy game looked in 1995 through 1997 and the heavy limitations that came with that. It is astonishing how well they were able to get everyone on board and on the same page about what the kind of main expectations were about telling a Pokemon story.
I really think it was a smart choice that for this particular story, Kanto is presented as the Pokemon world that's still in development. For example, without getting into too many details, Bill is still developing his PC system, so Red has to walk around initially with 20 Pokeballs on his belt. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of discovery of the Pokemon world while following this story.
Yeah, you mentioned him having loads of Pokeballs. I think that's one element that surprised me, is that his team often has these brief temporary members that he's caught in the area that he'll just use for a one-off, and he has the long-term battle team alongside it, but this iteration does not shy away from the collectathon angle in the way the anime does, which is interesting, because it's this is the more streamlined product of the two, whereas the anime is meant to be more long form, so you'd sort of expect the anime to lean more into that, but it doesn't really.
Well, I imagine that comes with some of the limitations that come from producing a serialized weekly anime, because, animation's pretty costly and time-consuming, and I imagine it would be kind of a pain in the butt to have to get your animators to draw a new switched-out team every single week. You would also have to take time out of the way in the episode to pause and be like, hey, I've switched this Pokemon out with this Pokemon, as the anime does tend to do whenever Ash has to switch out people in the team. Then again, in the manga, we do have, I think, that element of being more collectathon is based on the fact that, unlike the anime, Red is a relatively solitary character throughout it, compared to Ash, who has the benefit of also traveling with 2 other trainers and being able to showcase a variety of Pokemon from there.
And Red very much jumps around the region once his mobility options open up, much like a player of the games would.
Yeah.
Also in the anime, the villainous group is Team Rocket, and obviously here it is as well, but they're kind of different thematically. Over there in the anime, the theme is making friends with your pets, as opposed to like stealing the creatures from the best friends. Whereas here, like the dominant theme in the encounter with in Saffron City, kind of nature versus nurture in a sense. Like we have the attention drawn to Pallet Town as special because it's untouched by pollution. Its inhabitants have a special bond with the Pokemon. All of the champions were from Pallet Town in the Indigo League. Team Rocket, on the other hand, gets involved with evil scientific experiments.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Team Rocket are essentially the bad guys of Mother 3.
I mean, you're not wrong, but to that point of nature and environmentalism being a theme of this, that is something that does take its basis in the game. A lot of people don't tend to think about this, but Pokemon has always had a slight environmentalist bent to it, even from Generation 1, when you consider the abandoned house in Cinnabar Island, or the power plant where Zapdos resides, or the elements where Lapras's Pokedex entry talks about it being an endangered species. This is all stuff that is there, and I think a big strength to Pokemon as a franchise in terms of its spin-offs is that it is able to take this very wide pool of different concepts and themes and being able to choose which sort of pools to focus in. And I think that leads to a wider variety of different stories that could be told, and what I think helps to make the Pokemon world such a very interesting setting to be able to explore in these different kinds of adaptations.
Yeah. I do want to talk about Marco's art for a moment there.
Oh, yes.
I find it very pleasing to look at, especially in the volume release. I wasn't blessed to experience it in its full capacity as due to growing up in Poland, I only had access to the scans, as I said in the introductory episode. I do love the contrast between the cutesy chibi designs in the crowd scenes that make the characters look really dynamic, easy to draw, and works with the brisk pace of the story. And then there's the more serious, detailed close-ups. So the chibi, stubby designs look kind of like the overworld designs of the human characters from the games, while the dramatic shots kind of look like battle sprites. And it kind of seems like a nod to the games in that, and I really like it. It's kind of like a Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl do a similar thing.
Yeah, I forget which one of you two said this, but that point that was made earlier about this manga having so much personality being imbued into this, I think that is really reflected in Mato's art. When rereading through this volume recently, I found this little quote that they wrote in 1998 talking about, like, the artistic process. Like, quote, Pokemon don't move in the video games, but in my manga, they run all over the place. What's the most interesting way to show each Pokemon in action? I care a lot about that. I would be very happy if after reading the manga, people who have never even heard of Pokemon become fans, and if Pokemon fans grow to love Pokemon even more than before. And so much of how they draw these different characters and the different Pokemon does feel very emblematic of that kind of desire to present a lot of personality, and as you mentioned, that contrast between the sort of chibi, simplistic designs and the more detailed battle sprites. It almost feels like it's meant to present the world of Pokemon as someone in 1995 through 1998 would have imagined it for themselves. Almost an idealized version of that.
They mentioned how it was, the big challenge is to show how Pokemon move, and there's definitely a lot of interesting approaches to this that I wouldn't have thought of. Well, the big one being that when a rock Pokemon is defeated, it just, explodes into a pile of rocks.
Oh, yeah.
I think this happened with, an Onix and with a Golem.
I do really, really enjoy a lot of Mato's art through this. We'll go into a little bit more about the way the art has evolved over this series, but I think the fact that the designs of the Pokemon are still pretty recognizable while still having a distinct style to it, I think that's a really good testament to their eye for character design. I can think of no better example of this than the way that Mato draws Pikachu.
Oh yeah, fat Pikachu stands rejoice.
Making Pikachu as Kirby-like as possible is one of the most appealing versions of the character, honestly.
More like Thickachu, am I right?
Christ.
So there's one arc where they go to Lavender Town, to the Pokemon Tower of the Dead, and I love how creative the visuals get with realizing these ghostly Pokemon. You have some with rotting zombie flesh, you have some that are just skeletal, and of course it all turns out to be illusions by Ghastly and stuff, but it definitely plays with the concept in an interesting way.
And it's something that you also see similarly to the depictions of Mewtwo and how they kind of show its creation and the way it grows in Team Rocket's test tube. It creates a lot of interesting contrast between being able to present this very cute and approachable world while not being able to shy away from the darker elements to it.
Yeah. I think the art, generally speaking, tends to favor the dramatic turns in the fights as things that the page will focus its real estate on rather than centering the actual attacks. Those tend to be more incidental, with the exception of, I think, the Giovanni and the final fight between Red and Blue. Though one slight nitpick I have about this is that I think framing the ultimate outcome of that final fight as ambiguous, it would have worked a lot better if Charizard's blast back at Red's Pokemon had been given a little more attention. Because there is a hot minute where they're like, oh, which one? There's so much smoke, which one won? Whereas, in the framing of the previous panel, Red's attack got this big central page, and then Charizard's is this tiny little panel. And it's I feel like it's quite obvious who's won here.
Yeah.
I thought that it was unambiguous that it's Red one. I have to reread that.
It was the panels leading up to it that they draw a lot on the dust is clearing and who's still about, and there's a false finish of Blue standing.
And then Blue kind of dramatically falls over upon their defeat. Yeah, I don't know how characteristic this would have been for mangas released during this time period. Most of my manga experience stems from volumes published afterwards, so I don't have much of a frame of reference for how this is within its contemporaries, but it tends to be a little bit more ambiguous in terms of some of the mechanics. Like Pokemon battles, it tends to primarily showcase the big moves and the big twist, and being a lot less granular compared to, say, something like the anime. I still think it has resulted in a lot of really interesting vignettes and scenes, and I do think that Mato deserves a lot of credit of being able to take a lot of these very chaotic scenes and still being able to give them a relatively easy to follow play-by-play of these events.
Sadly, she will not stick around as the artist of the series for long. Unfortunately, was it a hand injury that left her unable to draw?
It was, I believe it happened around 2002 during the Gold, Silver, and Crystal arcs, and it is a shame because this is something that we have seen time and time again with a number of these different manga artists over the years, and it is very emblematic of the ways that the manga industry does really, really treat their artistic talent not as good as they should.
Crunch is definitely a very prevalent thing. I don't know how much it is different in the Koro magazine as it is in Shonen Jump, but yeah.
I can imagine it's probably similar, considering the rate in which that they've published these different volumes.
Yeah. Shall we go into our details on what we thought of the characters?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you have anything else to mention about the art, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you guys take the lead on that, because I've said a bunch already.
All right. So I do like Red. I think I've gained more of an appreciation for him in this read-through than I did in my first one. He does have a bit of an every boy, like a 90s every boy energy, but he has traits he's clearly defined by. His kindness, too, and friendship with his Pokemon.
Yeah.
But also overconfidence and vengefulness. Those are the two big things. He doesn't like getting tricked by Green at all.
Yeah. In like stark contrast to Ash, he's established as a big fish in a small pond at the start. Like, he's impressing all the other kids, being able to, oh, look, I can catch a Rattata, I'll take the coolest. As opposed to Ash, who is, like, an underdog even in Pallet Town standards. You definitely get that sense that, in contrast to Blue, he lacks the wisdom in battle that he has.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, I do really like his especially strategic moments, like the Pewter City Gym Challenge, like how he displays his skills in tactics, skillfully kind of using a Bulbasaur and obviously the MVP, Polyamor as well. They can get all their opponents in one hit since he can't heal them because the Pokemon Center is closed down.
With that penchant for strategy, I agree with all the stuff that you said thus far with Red. That sort of level of strategy, the fact that he does start off as less of an underdog to Ash, I think that is something that does stem from the fact that they have way less time to tell this story compared to the anime. So I think it does help the story to start him from that basic level of expertise, because unlike the anime, while Red is the POV character to a degree, I feel like there's probably less of an expectation for him to have to ask those basic, what does this thing mean? And how does this thing work? Unlike the anime.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that his prowess for learning accelerates as the series goes on. Like, in the first few chapters he is learning the basics, but then you have him, like, in the Pokemon Tower, he already knows of Ghastly without having to consult the dex. Like, he finds the dowsing machine off screen and stuff.
He is still a bit of an underdog, but the edge he kind of gains over Blue is clearly like his quick wit. So like he doesn't do as much preparation as like his rival, but he does think quick on his feet.
And that is something that you're able to even see during the very first chapter of this, when he has to help Professor Oak take down this Machoke, and they're hidden inside the Viridian City gym, and he sees the lights peeking out of the window slits, so he opens the window, exposing Bulbasaur to the light and letting him be able to use Solar Beam, because to which Oak is like, how the hell did you know this move? This is a very advanced move. To which he's like, I just figured, plants turn sunlight into energy, so this guy has a plant on its back, so that should work.
I mean, the real question is, how does this Bulbasaur know this move? But I don't want to get into nitpicking this.
Pokemon often evolve and learn moves at plot convenient places in this manga, and that's fine.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine. We're fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
One detail that I really like is that Red's Bulbasaur is always a little behind his two rivals, Green and Blue, in the evolution phase, and that the moment that Bulbasaur finally evolves is like basically a mid-battle power-up in the confrontation with the three birds in Saffron City. It was very cool.
That was a very cool climax, yes.
Yeah, most of the time, I think that Red becomes very interesting by the relationships that he makes with the other characters. Blue is a great example of that, because he also is kind of, I feel like, wouldn't be that interesting on his own, but his dynamic with Red is where the manga shines the most. I also enjoy the most when his kind of edginess is shown in a comedic way, when it's shown in particular what he lacks as a trainer. There is a chapter when Red and Blue swap Pokemon by mistake. And I love how Red's Pokemon become all diligent and serious and very serious about training, but because Blue trains them, while Blue's become cuddly instead.
Yeah, I think that's a very good touch. Blue especially, as you mentioned, they definitely turn up the edge for this character compared to old Gary Oak. And I think that definitely works in the favor of this manga, where I feel like in the game, Blue kind of has this air of mystery behind them, since you only see them a few times in the game. I think something that definitely helps with, as you mentioned, that core dynamic of Red versus Blue is really accentuated throughout this manga, where you can see how both are able to grow out of that rivalry, especially near the very end, where, as Professor Oak notes, Red starts off very rash and doesn't tend to think through a lot of their different attacks. And just being able to grow more and think about how he's able to keep his cool and be able to shore up that sort of instinctual approach that Red often uses, and being able to contextualize that instinct with knowledge. It's very book smarts versus street smarts is the way that I would set Red and Blue apart versus this.
At the same time, like Red in the final league match with Blue kind of manages as well to do his homework on Pokemon. I forget what exactly move it was, but he does like throw back to something that he learned before from Blue.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good way to set things apart. I think the thing that you were referring to was when Red switched out a Pokemon after beating one of Blue's Pokemon. As Red mentioned, hey, someone once told me that you gotta know your limits. And Blue realizes, someone once told me there's no satisfaction in beating a weak Pokemon. You love to see it when two people are able to learn from each other and adopt their better traits while still being able to keep their core personalities and ideas intact.
I found what I was referring to. It was like Red going, I guess you didn't know how maneuverable Snorlax can be, Blue, when like Snorlax defeats Machamp with an aerial attack.
I think, Blue entrusting Red with the Soul Badge in Saffron City Tower felt like a big turning point for the two of them. It's not just kind of, okay, I'll work with you for convenience's sake to take down this barrier. It's like he is trusting Red to take on a responsibility, whereas before he treated him as a liability, because of his compassion.
Mm-hmm. At the league match later, he can call Red a friend, literally, which is kind of the culmination of the relationship. This kind of makes the relationship more equal, and this rivalry is kind of more believable. I don't want to make a comparison to the anime, but I kind of do have to, since like in the anime, I often thought, why does like Gary even consider Ash a rival? What is his obsession with this kid who can't even reach the same height as him? Which is why his kind of bullying felt annoying.
I don't know. I would flip that around, honestly. Why would Ash care about this privileged Gary guy who Gary was just... I don't know. I always read Gary as like this kind of like spoiled guy who kind of just got everything kind of handed to him. Like the fact that he had this whole group of cheerleaders in a car that would just drive him from place to place so that he never had to worry about like going anywhere on foot.
My point kind of was that how does Gary find the energy to bully Ash like this? What's his point? Don't you have your whole Pokemon journey to do?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what happens when you get everything handed to you, you know? You just gotta be able to prove your superiority by taking easy targets. And I think that this is a much better contrast to that, because in this, you actually do get, in the anime where Gary was kind of just given this level of assumed skill without going into much detail about how, like, what he kind of did or the ways that he was able to achieve some of the things that he does. In this, you do actually get an impression that, oh, the reason why Blue is as good of a trainer as he is because he has clearly put in all this time, effort, and energy into finding his Pokemon strengths and trying to accentuate those strengths as much as possible, even if it is sometimes done for slightly apathetic reasons, I would say.
Yeah. Do you have any more notes on Blue, Hoven?
I think that about, like, sums it up. You guys have kind of said a lot of what I was going to say, and that, yeah, I think his dynamic with Red and how it evolves is very much the backbone of the series. And yeah, it's great that the series finishes on that, and showing how they've learned from each other. I guess we can get into someone who I've put in my notes as Teenage River Song, Green.
Oh, I was gonna say Teenage Fujiko
that also
Green,
works.
I would say she's probably not a teenager, so she's probably 10.
She is 10, even though they give her boobs.
They're not boobs per se, they're the... Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay. Do we want to talk about how her Sabrina fight was drawn in the original Japanese?
Well, that happens in the Yellow Arc, doesn't it?
No, it was here.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, I did not know about this.
Oof.
Sabrina versus...
In the original Japanese release, so once in the Saffron City, Blue has her battle with Sabrina.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just Googling this. Right.
Right here, the localizing team did the best to adjust and to, like, perhaps not make not make some body specific comments with this 10-year-old girl character.
Yeah.
Here, like she says, oh, judging by your flyaway hair and tacky outfit, you aren't cute and stylish like me. And then Sabrina says, cheap shots, eh? And then Kadabra slashes at her chest, and Sabrina goes, like, I lost my focus when she dissed me. Oh no, in the Japanese release, so Kadabra slashed her dress open, and 2 Pokeballs, yeah.
Were hidden in her boobs, and she was able to release her Clefairy and Jigglypuff, and it's like, yeah, hey Japan, I just want to talk. Like, no disrespect, but what the hell?
And I hate that this is the first thing that we say about Green, because, like, she is probably my favorite character for this series, and she is so much more than that.
Because she's such a much more interesting character than that.
Her introduction chapter is fantastic. She like the way her deceptions are built upon layers after layers after layers of tricks. How she always has an escape route and can get away with just about anything. It's just phenomenally entertaining, and she brings a great energy to the series.
Henry mentioned Fujiko, and yeah, the hijinks with her, they have a very Lupin-esque quality to them. With how it's just constantly, every time you think she's out of rope, she finds some other way to get away or to get what she wants.
Yeah. And I brought up Fujiko specifically because I get the impression that those kind of unfortunate gags stemmed from the creators being like, oh, we want to add this sort of femme fatale type of anti-hero type character. Oh, Fujiko is a pretty good basis to start from, assuming that you aren't really thinking too much about the actual age of these children characters. But I do agree that she brings such a great energy to it, especially since there is always that degree of ambiguity with Red where he's like, is this person actually a good guy or a bad guy? What is her deal? Why? Like, the fact that after he helped to rescue Mew with her, it's one of those things where it's like, oh wow, we did such a good thing. Oh, this is great. To which she's like, Yes, but also I got some exclusive first ever photos that are gonna go for a crazy amount on the black market. Bye! And it's like, so there's just always that grift, which is especially accentuated by how almost immediately after she also returns the gym badges that she had stolen from Red earlier in the chapter. All sorts of like really interesting character work.
Yeah, and at least you think she does, but then later on in the Saffron City, we realize, oh wait, no, she was playing the long game.
Yeah, that's true.
She has the real one still, so that she could use the device.
You would think that Pokemon badges might have like some bigger authentication process or something like that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, in those Mew chapters, I was especially impressed how she hid her plan to make a quick buck with like another quick rich scheme. Just the photos of Mew were enough for her. That was quite fun. And I also forgot that we did get some dramatic stuff with her. I forgot that her greatest fear was set up in the battle against Sabrina, and ultimately I love the resolution of her character in the Indigo League match.
I think we'll get into a little bit more about her backstory, especially in the Gold Silver arc, because they didn't go into a lot of detail about that here. But it's interesting that you mentioned the Indigo League battle, because there is a lot about this that really demonstrates how Green's fundamental strength as a trainer, similar to her ability as a con woman, is reflected in her battle style, since most of her battle techniques involve using very evasive maneuvers, as well as that image of her using her Blastoise as like a jetpack continues to be one of the most just badass things that has lived in my head rent-free when thinking about Pokemon.
Mm-hmm. The way that the trainers battle essentially alongside the Pokemon is quite fun over here, yeah.
We've talked about her battle with Sabrina a lot, and I guess to go back to that, because you have the Command Triad, which are the faction of Team Rocket that are the leaders who are also gym leaders. And I did find, one thing I did like is that there are parallels between them and the main trio in their matchup partners.
Yeah.
So Surge takes Red's arrogance to a new extreme in his whole casting aside his title and its restrictions for sheer power. Sabrina matches Green's approach for manipulating opponents, and then Koga, much like Blue, equates Red's compassion as a liability.
Yeah.
I really like, I was saying earlier, one of the things I really like about the Mewtwo chapter is that it then has a kind of, there is this ambiguity between what Blue and what Koga says of, it does Red's constant compassion get people in trouble more than it helps them? And then we see, like, what he has done has influenced one of Blaine, who is working as a scientist for them, to switch sides. And I think that's a really nice way to kind of kick back at that notion.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, you talked a little bit about Team Rocket earlier on, and I do have to reiterate that it was a really great choice to make, like, over half of the gym leaders part of Team Rocket. 8 strong, charismatic characters on the good guys' side can be a bit of a pitfall in battle manga, as then you have to try really hard to make the antagonists seem threatening. Here, Kusaka avoids that pitfall by going, why don't I just make those charismatic characters the antagonists? So this way, Team Rocket can still be a regular old mafia. The world can still feel threatening without a world-ending catastrophe, and gym leaders can be naturally introduced into the story and not feel incidental. I feel like, for better or for worse, this is really an element of the manga that contributed to like its reputation as a more mature version of the Pokemon world, as the threat is always there, the authority isn't always on your side.
Mm-hmm.
I also really liked how they used the Pokemon in it, because the Team Rocket have been modifying the Pokemon. They incorporate that into the Saffron City matches. So like Surge just has a bunch of Magnemites powering this like Voltorb launching Gatling gun thing.
Yeah.
I guess more like a grenade launcher. And then Koga is using his
Ninja Star Pokeballs.
yeah, and his muck is like making a sort of poisonous armor for him.
Also, sort of on the line with Sabrina, we see how her Kadabra ends up impersonating Professor Oak at one point. This is one of the instances where we get to see one of those rare instances, an Oak impersonator, which, if you played the trading card game, you might remember that card showing up in a couple of places.
Oh, yeah.
It's an interesting thing where this imposter, Professor Oak, showed up, like, once in the, like, Johto League anime. It was primarily a original, which... like, as a concept, it's kind of cool to see that idea of, like, oh, someone's impersonating this trusted figure. I'm surprised that we haven't seen that kind of an idea iterated upon more.
Yeah, in a sense, like, this manga does kind of a better job at being true to the words of the anime opening. Oh, you're my best friend in a world we must defend.
One thing I thought was very well handled throughout this manga is how Giovanni was characterized. I really liked his introduction with his facade as a friendly stranger. We already know to be sinister from the very start of the chapter because we just see a statuesque bust of him. So we immediately know it's him. It's interesting how the games would kind of emulate this with people like Cyrus and Lysandre, although they're just looking shifty right from the beginning. So when you find out they're the boss, it's like, yeah, of course they're the boss. Yeah, we get this like spiel from him about how Red is no threat to him and will destroy himself, and yet he decides to take down the Magmar that were going after him. So it's very clear that he has an interest in Red's continued journey, even if it's only for curiosity's sake, and he won't like admit that to himself out loud.
Yeah.
Although it is kind of funny how, like, in presenting him as a harmless figure at first, in his kind of facade with Red there, Mato turns to kind of presenting him his face in a very goofy way.
Yeah, it does look a little bit goofy at first.
Sometimes with those goofy faces, it's kind of hard to see him as a threat there. But also in another sense, his deceptive nature is kind of built up, so I do appreciate that.
Yeah, and then his final battle with Red is a really good test of Red's mettle, of everything he's learnt up until that point.
Definitely. Especially with the plot beat where he says that you have only 5 seconds to do this for this attack. It would be impossible for you to be able to do this. And this caused Red to be able to have to really think on his feet and take advantage of all of his capabilities as a trainer in order to be able to actually survive that ordeal.
One thing I had to wonder, how many days was Giovanni just stood there waiting in that empty gym for Red? I hope it was several.
Probably had like a little camera thing set up all around Viridian City to be like, oh, there he is. All right. And just immediately hightailing it over there as soon as like he shows up on the radar. Get like a sleeping bag.
I find Misty a very fun character here. There are many facets to her personality and, like, especially her determination to stop Team Rocket, in contrast to, like, Red's once lax attitude. And of course, it's quite satisfying to see her single-handedly obliterate that giant Dragonite.
Oh yeah, maybe this is just my anime bias showing, but I really, really enjoy just the kind of relationship that Misty and Red kind of have throughout this. Like, even in that introductory chapter with her trying to capture the Gyarados and the two of them having to travel to Mount Moon together, and then Red having to realize, oh man, I've been really underestimating Misty as a trainer because of my old sexism, my 90s shonen sexism, so I need to drink my respect women juice, because even though Misty looks nice in that ballroom gown that she wears, she'll still kick your ass.
Yeah, it's like the Misty is embellished in completely different ways in the anime and manga, because in the anime he actually had her like 3 sisters who also were joint gym leaders, whereas in this one she's kind of this aristocrat figure in Cerulean City.
Which I mean, that was somewhat in the games as well. She had that, even in Gen 1, she had the description of being the, quote, mermaid of Cerulean. This, like, kind of, like, high-class type of girl, according to a lot of the descriptions. So I think those are two, like...
As all mermaids are.
Indeed. I think that is I don't know, I think that's a very interesting parallel to draw there. Is there anything else about the other gym leaders?
I find Erica quite nice in her introduction and then in her role kind of built up to be... We already have kind of experienced several gym leaders from the game to be like on Team Rocket's side, so we already have the expectation that it is a possibility. Then Erica kind of subverts that, and then she kind of becomes has the leading role in leading the citizens of Celadon and the whole resistance against Team Rocket.
Yeah, that's true. Although, I will say, the fact that she was very willing to have Evie killed for all of that, I don't know, there was a level of hardcore attitude that is nicely deceptive, considering that she has this very fluffy, passive first impression when we first see her, that there's a nice... It does keep you kind of questioning a lot of that kind of stuff.
I've talked about the gym leaders not feeling incidental due to those storytelling choices that Kusaka took in like tying them to Team Rocket.
Yeah.
One exception among gym leaders, which does make them feel incidental, is Brock.
Yeah, he is just kind of there.
I don't know how this manga managed to create a more boring version of Brock than any other piece of media in the Pokemon franchise.
Like, he shows up and he's like, oh, okay, I guess he'd be on their side. Okay.
He just seems like, I'm this angry pro wrestler type of dude. Rocks.
I hang out in my private suite with all my pokes, folding my arms.
Looking very serious. In fairness, Brock, they don't give them exactly a lot of material compared to, like, other... Like, in the games, compared to, like, the other gym leaders, Brock doesn't exactly have a whole lot of stuff going for them. Like, with characters like Lieutenant Surge, you can identify, oh, Lieutenant Surge is army dude. Sabrina, oh, she's psychic lady. Oh, Koga, he's a ninja. Brock is just like, I'm shirtless. I like rocks. All that to say, it kind of makes me somewhat appreciate the anime's ability more to flesh out Brock compared to this, because the anime's first instinct when it came to fleshing out Brock was, hey, what if we made him really horny?
I mean, he is the breeding expert, yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh.
Okay, well, that said, I do hope not to give too much away, but I will say Brock does end up getting a little bit more characterization in some of the future chapters after this, but
I mean, I guess that is kind of the advantage of them going over the region like more than once. They can flesh out elements that they weren't able to with this particular arc.
But I definitely agree. They've done Brock dirty in this one. They could have maybe added this beat that was added in future games where Brock is a big helper for the Pewter City Museum, because they talk about how he helps them, like, trying to excavate fossils and stuff for historical research. I felt like they probably that could have been an angle that they could have added in, perhaps, to better introduce the element of Pokemon fossils, since they kind of just drop that, and then one they introduces Red's Aerodactyl later on. But it is hard to imagine what else they could have really done with Brock in this manga, considering how little about the character there really was at that point when the series was just starting off.
Yeah, and they had basically Giovanni hand in the old Amber to Red instead. Before we get to our other notes, I do have one more character note, which is about the MVP of this arc as a whole, and I think that we can all agree that it's Pidgeybot. The Pokemon robot whose purpose is to keep the customer of the Safari Zone safe, and after some wacky hijinks involving some poaching on Red's part, not cool, after Red is kind towards them, they display fear for his life, and they become the emotional core of the series, truly. So long live Pidgeybot.
Long live Tsundere Bird Robot.
Indeed. The fact that they got you to care so much about this little piece of metal is astonishing. Especially, I do want to give extra credit towards Mato for being able to show a like a clear difference between regular Pidgeys and this robot Pidgey. A+ character design.
It was excellent.
It's a bold choice that they made Bill Southern.
I guess he would have had a Kansai accent in the games, because that's usually how those kind of accents are translated.
Which, that's very interesting. I do appreciate the fact that they made Bill kind of like this sort of tech exposition guy that could appear every now and then to help Red out when he needs like a new gadget. I think he's fine. The fact that he's such a bit of comic relief, it's a nice blending of being nice comic relief and clearly being like an expert in what the different fields that he's discussed. I have only one other character thing to note. They made Professor Oak so buff in this.
Man is hench. Yeah, the only other thing I've got is that I think another initial reveal I really like is that the leader of the Team Rocket Squad in Mount Moon is Koga. It's really well played because he just got the cap on and he's got the little scarf and the fishnet shirt, but then it's like the moment that he takes his cap off, you realise who he is, and it plays on your awareness of the game character in quite a cheeky, fun way.
Yeah, I agree.
Great foreshadowing.
I actually have one last character thing. I think it also bears mentioning the president of the Pokemon fan club being this unhinged old man. Like, the fact that he just casually tried to steal someone's Pokemon at the Pokemon League. Sir, what are you doing? Is all I'm gonna ask. Also, why are you publishing, like, zines of the Pokemon fan club talking about, quote, "That's the last time I'll take a bath with my Tentacruel"?
Yep, I picked up on that one.
It's like, sir, what kind of fan club are you running here?
Boycott the Pokemon fan club. The Pokemon fan club captain is a pest.
I think I was like very innocent when reading this because I didn't think too much of it. I thought it was like, oh yeah, it would make sense that you wouldn't take a bath with your tentacle, but because like you would be burned by the little tentacles. So it's a jellyfish after all.
From the acid. Yeah.
I completely didn't pick up on the implications there.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't pick up on that implication when I don't think got full grasp of that until I was like maybe 17 after having read the manga for like 5 years. And then just being like kind of embarrassed that it took me that long to put 2 and 2 together there. So rest assured, Wensleydale, you are not alone.
All right, shall we get to the random observations?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Starting off with, oh my god, Pokemon poop? That was a weird realization when Pidgey just put some droppings onto Oak in like the second chapter.
Well, I mean, in Diamond and Pearl, they have Pokemon fertilizer as an item, so it's
so they do.
Yeah, so it's not without precedent, but yeah, it is suitably gross, but I do think that does speak to the fact that something that this manga does very well is that it does actually give a very good sense of Pokemon as being actual living, breathing creatures with their own kind of biology and making it have a sense of believability. Because again, I do want to stress, this game, like this manga was being released when the only other main frame of reference for Pokemon as creatures was this very simple Game Boy RPG.
Yes, and I would say that at one point in the story we get a very good vertical slice of that biology.
Okay, should we talk about that stupid Arbok?
It's funny because you've told me that like a lot of the fans build it up as being so dark and so kind of gruesome, and it's like the way it plays out, it's more striking in like this is like a Tom and Jerry like skit moment. With like the fact that there's no blood and there's just kind of like a bone and meat inside.
I mean, people thought Arbok getting chopped in half was brutal. Honestly, I thought like Bellsprout fucking draining the prey of all life force so they can evolve. That was way more terrifying, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Or the thing I would point to is when there was that one Hypno that was attacking Erica, and her Vileplume just covers the thing in like leaf shurikens, and it's just lying on the ground like dazed with all of these sharp leaves sticking out of them. or the fact that Eevee, you get to see how their body is being, like, physically mutated in a process that clearly causes pain to this Pokemon. Like, that is way darker than all that kind of stuff. I think most manga fans at this point are kind of just annoyed by that one Arbok panel because it's very clickbaity in terms of why it's shocking. It doesn't really need a whole lot of explanation for, like, oh, why it's so dark. Because the other darker elements that you do see in this manga, especially with, like, the final confrontation in Saffron City, as well as the stuff with Eevee and the way that Team Rocket experiments, that is stuff that is more conveyed just through, like, character reactions and emotions. And it's way more subtle than I think this panel might lead certain people to believe. I tend to give people the side eye whenever they talk about how, like, oh, this thing is so dark because they did insert violent thing here. Or, oh, it's so much more mature, because usually the people that kind of make those kinds of arguments, I don't know, I always get the impression that they're really, really trying so desperately to prove that, hey, this stuff isn't just for kids. It's got blood and stuff. It's for grown-ups.
I mean, even in the kind of physical stuff, in the physical horror of this manga, you could point to much better examples. For example, the thing I was shocked by, it turned out to be like a bit of an illusion. In the chapter with Bill, Red was fighting against that Fearow, and the Fearow fucking drill-pecked Poliwhirl right in the center of its spiral. It just went right through. This was much more striking to me.
And impaled him, yeah. Yeah, or you mentioned earlier Giovanni attacking those Magmar that were going to attack Red, having those Magmar encased in ice and the ice shattering into a bunch of different pieces where you could still see the big chunks of meat still, like, inside the ice. I feel like I don't know, that feels way more disturbing versus any of that. I think for me, when it comes to those kind of darker elements, I think it is one of those things that sometimes people dismiss it for the comic being edgy for edgy's sakes, you know, being like, oh, look how badass we are. We're way cooler than the anime guys. I think it kind of more speaks to the fact that something that the manga does really well is it does convey the fact that Pokemon are very powerful creatures, and there is a very visceral element of danger that can be found with these abilities and with these creatures. And as such, these are things that it reinforces some of those environmental themes we talked about earlier. You need to be able to respect that. Hey, if you don't properly treat nature properly, it's going to cause some big problems for you down the line.
Yeah, I do have some criticism towards how the story handled the game elements, which obviously is justified given that the games were very new at the time. This will seem nitpicky, but some game inaccuracies do kind of bring me out of the experience. So I mostly like how the battle moves are used creatively to interact with the environment and so on. But then there are some choices that neither creative nor should be very effective. Like using poison powder to knock out the enraged Nidoking, who is poison type himself. It's kind of a no-brainer. It kind of sticks out as a sore thumb, especially in otherwise a very fun chapter that displays Red's tactical skills with limited resources in a creative way. In the battle with Giovanni, there's Pikachu's Thunderbolt being an ace in a hole against him with his ground-type Pokemon, in which it wouldn't bother me, but that we have the text kind of contradicting himself, because like back in the battle against Eevee, when he was turning into Jolteon, Red, I believe, sent out Diglett to counter that because ground-type Pokemon would be effective against him. So there is some matchup stuff that does kind of contradict itself, but again, this was a very new game with quite complex rules, with 15 different types that you have to remember, so it's completely understandable that turned out the way it did.
Yeah, well, in speaking to that battle with Giovanni Wensleydale, like, I don't know, I get the impression that the reason why they went with Pikachu being the deliverer of that final blow is kind of, by that point, I imagine they had figured out, oh, okay, we're going to get this follow-up with Pokemon Yellow. Pikachu's going to be the center of that. Cool. Let's build up Pikachu as this powerful thing.
Yeah, and there's the payoff with Red turning the weapons of Team Rocket against Team Rocket. That was very thematically satisfying, and I did really like that. And I wouldn't have mentioned it if not for the battle with Eevee, but yeah, again, this is kind of nitpicky.
In terms of interesting flavouring of moves, I think Bulbasaur's Sleep Powder, the fact that it starts with a seed that bursts and then disperses, whereas I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the version that I'm more used to is just the Pokemon just launches the powder directly. So that was a fun way to make it more specific to that Pokemon and how it would work. Another move embellishment was that Substitute, actually attacking things and kind of being like a hologram projection that can actually do things. That slightly threw me. I always imagined it as just kind of a doll is summoned and then the Pokemon just kind of attacks from a hidden location, perhaps just right behind the doll.
I appreciate the creative usage of Ditto on the part of Green, the fact that Ditto briefly is used as a sort of mask to appear like Sabrina. Again, kind of given some of those Lupin the Third and Fujiko parallels.
The way she uses all of her Pokemon is very interesting, how the Squirtle evolutions and Jigglypuff are her main means of escape. Then there's Ditto. Her team is quite fun and kind of chosen to embellish her role as a rogue, as a thief.
This is more of a nitpick, but it's not helped by the black and white manga, but Aerodactyl and Charizard look very similar in Mato's art style.
But yeah, there is a similarity there, although I don't know, I think they tried at least to make Aerodactyl kind of more bony and thin as a result, but you're right, it is, there are a couple of instances.
There was a part where, I think Red and Green and Blue were both flying around outside the tower or outside the barrier, and it was there were a few panels where wait, why is Red with the Charizard? Oh, that's Aerodactyl.
Yeah, that's fair.
I liked Angela the Tangela. It's just a great nickname for it.
I did love some references in that. I love how apparently Mickey Mouse exists in this universe. Since early on, Red makes a comparison between him and Pikachu. Also, Team Rocket make a reference to Tom Sawyer.
There was an M&M in there. Will the real Blastoise please stand up? Blue is a connoisseur of white boy rapping.
Yeah.
Apparently, Archimedes exists in this universe as well. Although we never did get to the Greece region. Well, yet at least.
Yet, give it time. We'll get there eventually.
I think this is my standout comedic line in the Cerulean City mini-arc, when kind of Misty reveals herself as a gym leader. It's supposed to be a serious moment, but I find it quite funny. Red is like, "Where is this moron gym leader?" And Misty's like, "That moron is me!"
It's like that Simpsons line of just the moron next door closed early. Well, I happen to be that moron.
Misty, I get you get the intent, but it's like, Misty, that didn't work as well as you might have thought it did.
A few notes on the localization. Everyone keeps saying "Phooey," like the Donald Duck. Was this still a child-friendly expletive in the States in the late 90s, I wonder?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I didn't know.
I think the most interesting choice of words was when Red described Pikachu's bad temper as ornery. I had to do a bit of a Google for that one.
Yeah, same here.
There is a couple of little things about the way they talk here that does feel a little bit vintage in terms of the ways that sometimes Ash does talk with this kind of 90s cool kid bravado, surf's up dude type of stuff. It only does happen intermittently enough, but every time it did happen, I'm a little oh, the 90s. You were a mistake.
But we love him for that. The awkward transition from 2D to 3D in video games, the slow integration of CGI into movies, and all of the crazy Dutch angle lenses we got.
Oh god.
But yeah, no, I think my last note is that I really love Koga's little Golbat screen on his little PDA. Thought that was a very cute little detail.
Yeah.
A few more notes on the localization. So in Chapter 1, the Team Rocket members that Red meets have great balls marked with the letter S, because the original name of that particular device is Super Ball. So that's one thing that's been omitted from the localization there.
Mm-hmm. trying to think if there are any other big instances I've seen. It is interesting that in terms of the localization, how very early on in Pokemon, there was still a very distinctly Japanese identity that you could ascribe to much of Pokemon. Like, you see this a lot in the early anime as well, where there are a number of like instances where you can see how, oh, yep, they're clearly doing a pastiche of this element of life in the Kanto plains of Japan. Like, Erika's whole aesthetic kind of giving off a lot of those. I don't think they're going for like a geisha type thing, because that's not a... They're trying to go for like a more...
I think she's just like a noble lady.
Yeah, like something from like a feudal Japan noble.
Yeah, she just has a bit of a traditional noble vibe, I think.
Yeah.
Which I think ends up like accentuating some of those dilemmas between like the conflict between modernism and like sort of tradition and environmentalism, which is kind of present. You see a little bit more of that actually in the gold and silver arcs in the future, but we will get to that when we get to that.
Mm-hmm. A few notes on the game references. I do wonder if the Mew View device, as it was called here, was supposed to be the Sylph Scope, given how often this manga needs to advertise game features. And then again, like the Sylph Company didn't seem to be much of a thing here, apart from its location being the Team Rocket base.
I would not be surprised if that's what they were going for.
Some of the game elements are never quite the same as they are in the game itself. Like, for example, the safari is originally just for viewing, and then things kick off into motion when Red smuggles a Pokeball inside. It was a very fun way to like create conflict for that particular short story. I like that adjustment.
We haven't talked a lot about the conflict with Mewtwo. I will say that I do appreciate how... I've yet to see like a depiction of Mewtwo in a lot of Pokemon media that I feel doesn't do a good job, but like something I like about this version of Mewtwo is how much of the strategy is just based around trying to get the Master Ball to it and trying to survive based off of that. The question not being, can they actually beat Mewtwo, because that doesn't seem like something that's really possible, versus are they able to outlast it long enough to be able to actually...
contain it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I'm really surprised that more Pokemon media has not used the Mewtwo spoon. That seems like something that's just kind of like a no-brainer kind of cool thing that feels like you could do some fun stuff with that idea of like Mewtwo just conjuring up like a psychic spoon and just smacking dudes with it.
It was amazing, and think of the merchandise possibilities. You can have in addition to your Mewtwo action figure, you can also buy a little accessory to it.
Indeed, yeah. I was worried you were going to make like a Yowie panel reference.
What? What?
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Anime conventions in the early 2000s were a mistake.
Oh, yeah, the Yowie paddle. Okay, I heard it as Yowie panel. Okay.
Sorry, I meant to say paddle. Yeah.
Okay. I know what that is. Okay. Also, one other thing that I was going to mention is Blue's Pokedex shows a town map image from the game, which was quite fun. But then the avatar showing his icon is red, so there can only be one reason for this: that they must be boyfriends. It's the only possibility.
No other explanation.
I have one more note I forgot about. So I love how, despite the league match showing how much Red and Blue learned from each other, and how Blue became more empathetic and understanding of his team, in the end, Red's like, "But you don't really understand friendship, Blue." It's kind of a line that undercuts everything else that happened in this chapter, which is very good. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they gotta get that shonen monologue in somewhere, you know?
Yeah, understandable.
Shall we move into the Q&A, or do you have any more?
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the Q&A. Can we bring up the questions? I'm going to be winging for most of this.
Okay, shall I read out the first one? I've got them.
Yeah.
So, from Deoxys Owo, What do you think about the legendary bird fusion? Excessive creative freedom? Opinion? I don't know. Good luck with your podcast. Thank you, Deoxysowo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought it was very fitting with the sort of tampering that Team Rocket was doing, and had been set up well beforehand with that Eevee. I got the impression that it was less intended to be like a cool, unique new design, and more like a horrific homunculus. Which job well done.
Well, I do recall. I need to remember where I found this, but I do recall that this was an idea that they had aped from some early concepts that were being floated around at Game Freak while they were developing the game. Like, I know that they had this idea of potentially fighting like an amalgamation type Pokemon at a certain point, but then deciding, oh, this is a little bit too dark for our game and would be way too hard to program. I don't know. I think it's a pretty good extenuation of the sort of like nature versus industry type of themes that they were developing throughout this whole manga, because it's like the whole ethos of Team Rocket writ large: take the things that are sacred and vital to the survival of the Pokemon world and exploit it and mutate it in our own image for the purpose of profit and control. It's kind of a thing that they have to really build up, and it's kind of like one of those cool things that requires them to all work together the way that they do in order to actually survive that whole thing. I don't know. I think it's a pretty cool beat. Honestly, would not be against them trying to do more things like that in the future.
You do have basically hit the nail on the head. From the start, I never expected this to be much of a permanent thing. I expected it to be only temporary. I didn't have much problem with that. It didn't stop me from when I created my my own Pokemon generations. When I was drawing these kind of things, it didn't stop me from making. Oh, I'm going to make a legendary Pokemon that's fusion of Venusaur and Poliwrath, and also it's going to have 4 golems as its torso. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I do think it is a testament to Mato's ability as an artist that the design did turn out as coherent as it did, because I imagine the challenge of having to meld together those kind of Pokemon the way that the story called for is not an easy task.
And I did think that it was a better idea than, for example, to bring Mewtwo back in Saffron City still, because otherwise it would be kind of undercutting the importance of the legendary birds. It was a good choice that they kind of got the last hurrah in that. So then another question from Aromantic Benzene from Reddit. Did you enjoy Red and Green's dynamic and interactions, or Red and Blue's more? I feel like Red gets portrayed as an underdog to both of them, but gets more of a back and forth with his rival, whereas he's constantly tricked by here, Aromantic Benzene means Green, to the point that it almost seems unfair. But I also really like that it shows Blue or Green's craftiness. So what are your thoughts? We should probably mention, because we touched upon it on the previous podcast, Blue and Green were originally named the other way around due to the release of the games in Japan, and then it kind of got turned for American flag reasons to Red and Blue.
I think I prefer the overall dynamic between Red and Blue more, with them learning from each other, but the actual interactions are a lot more fun with Red and Green.
I agree. I think that, I don't know, maybe that's just my Blastoise apologia, but I feel like there's a lot of really fun stuff that kind of works, because when it's just Red and Blue, most of the dynamic just kind of begins and ends as like, oh, I'm gonna be better than you. No, I'm gonna be better than you. Whereas with Green, it's so much more unpredictable, and there's that chaotic element that I think really tests Red's ability to adapt. And honestly, I think that there's like a lot of interesting stuff that kind of accentuates the underdog elements that could be seen in Red versus both of them. I think overall, though, it's one of those ¿por qué no los dos situations, you know? I think, because I feel like if you had just one or the other, Red's overall development would have been undercut, I think. I think he needed to be able to interact and develop around those other characters in order to actually kind of prove himself as a trainer.
I would agree. On top of that, I'm totally biased towards Green since she's my favorite character. I think like her interactions with other dex holders, especially also she kind of gets great interactions with just about anyone, and it's a testament of how great of a character she is.
I think Red and Blue, it's one that benefits from being told across multiple little vignettes and one-off kind of run-ins, which is why I think for me I found their payoff at the end a lot stronger than... I know you guys really like Green's, but I thought Green and Blaine's, their payoffs at the very end of the series could have both benefited from like a little more time. That kind, again, that denouement that the series is never really allowed to have, or maybe just isn't something they have.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. Although I think, Hoven, you haven't... You've
Yes.
only read the red, blue, and green arcs thus far, correct? So, not to go into too much detail, but I think something that this manga does benefit from is that, as we mentioned earlier, we do get to see how these characters change as we revisit them. So, I don't know. I think you will like what you see in the future. I will leave it there.
Yeah, they're allowed to grow up, which is great for them.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the future arcs a lot.
Which brings me to kind of my question that I wanted to ask during the course of this recording. Now that you've read this arc and you know how it ends and how it basically adapts the whole region, what do you think the yellow arc is going to be like? This is a question to you, Hoven.
I think it'll have a different main character. The ones from this arc will come back in supporting roles. I don't know. It might. My prediction is that it'll be more focused on, I guess, the gym challenges. It's got to involve the Elite Four some more, since they're clearly hinted at here. So perhaps this new main character will end up actually challenging them. Although, with that said, this arc kind of covered the gym challenges, so I don't know if variations on what we've seen of them is the way to go, or if it'll be more like that's more of a background thing, and the Elite Four are worked in some other way. So it's very hard to say.
Ew. I'm very excited. I'm not going to say anything.
Not to spoil too much, but how long do you think the yellow arc will be?
I've already looked. It's 50 chapters, right?
Yeah, it's an omnibus and a half. So
Yeah, no, it's a long one.
even I was kind of surprised when I saw that. This is longer than the red, green, and blue arc. My God.
Mm-hmm.
See, with me, I will avoid bits of the soundtrack or actual plot point spoilers like the plague for future things, but looking up like how long story arcs are or what story arcs are coming up just in terms of their name, I do it compulsively.
Okay.
I think you're going to have a very interesting time reading through that and seeing how much those things came to fruition.
Yeah. Definitely. How do you... Also, I'm looking through Blue's names and how they were localized throughout like different... Green's names and how they were localized throughout different languages. Did you know that in one French translation of the manga, her name was Olga?
That's a choice.
I don't really have any notes on the volume extras. I don't think it merits a whole different section.
I do appreciate how... Well, I appreciate how near the end of each, like... the end of what would have been at each volume, they include a little, like, lit update on, like, each person's Pokedex in terms of, like, how many Pokemon they've seen and caught. And I think that's, like, a nice little bit of flavor text.
Yeah, although Route 1, Route 2, Route 3 venture maps, it was a bit confusing given what we know to be the names of the routes in the games.
I think that is going to about do it, though. So,
yeah, let's round off. Yeah, that is going to do it for the first proper episodes of Podcastmon Adventures. You can listen to us wherever you listen to your podcasts, so if you want to search for us and don't want to click on all the links, you can always visit patreon.com/Wensleydale Cheddar. This is where all the links are, everything is in the pinned post, and that also is what helps me pay the bills, so if you want me to devote more time to making the show better, consider supporting me there.
yeah.
In return, you can get your name in the YouTube credits or get access to some bonus content. as we were once again dipping into Pokemon content on this channel, Spinning Ash and I decided to record a Nuzlocke of Pokemon Soul Silver. We're having a lot of fun with it, and a bonus perk is that we're naming our Pokemon after patrons. So the episodes should be available to all the patrons at the $1 tier. So yeah, come check it out. And remember that much like the depths of the Hoenn Oceans, the YouTube algorithm is a dark abyss of sorrows and woes from which channels like these never resurface. And what helps us navigate it is liking, subscribing, and sharing the podcast with a friend. On the same YouTube channel, you can get access to my manga video essays and Duckface Diaries, a retrospective podcast where Hoven and I cover the cult sci-fi manga World Trigger volume by volume. Alongside special guests like the series lecturer, who we've had recently on. Ace Christman was also the lecturer of Pokemon Adventures at one point, so do check that out. Henry, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me in a whole lot of places. On the Twitters at CathmanHenry, that where most things are updated, but the thing I want to try and rely on more is my Tumblr page, which compiles everything into one place. Podcasts, videos, tabletop, all of it, henrycathman.tumblr.com. But if you enjoy hearing my voice, be it through videos or podcasts, you can find me on youtube.com/henrycathman, where recently I made the endeavor of publishing a 2-hour and 45-minute video essay compiling my thoughts and analysis on close to every major adaptation of the fairy tale Cinderella done over the past 25 years. A 9-month endeavor that I am finally free from.
I haven't watched your Cinderella tier list video yet. I'm planning to right after recording this podcast, probably.
And additionally, if you want to hear me just through the podcast form, I host a podcast called The Pink Isle with Emma Corey, where I go through different pieces of girl-centric video media, particularly the Barbie ones, but we are currently going through the American Girl Doll series. So give us a listen there.
I recently listened to your episode about the, I think it was the American Revolution. I forgot what was the name of the girl.
Felicity?
Felicity, the neolib centrist.
Yeah, no, God, such a... Yeah, she's a piece of work. Oddly enough, I don't know if she's as infuriating as Molly was, though.
Oh.
You can find more stuff specifically about that at pinkisle.podbean.com or at pinkislepod on Twitter. Oh yeah, shoot, I also have a Patreon. I have way too many things. Patreon.com/HenryCathman supports all of that stuff for $1 a month. Appreciate the listen.
Absolutely, go check that out. Hoven, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Hoven with an H, YouTube Hoven with an H, and yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, check out his podcast, but Hoven's Hideaway. I've been on it many times before. You talk usually about it's a miscellaneous pod, but you talk about a lot of long-running manga endings. Is a big thing, right?
Yeah, we also we talked about Toby Fox a little. We did an episode discussing Undertale and Deltarune with cosplay extraordinaire and a star of the recent MCM Comic Con cosplay masquerade, Xeno.
Ooh.
We're hoping to do one for Chapter 2 at some point, but, no rush there.
I mean, Lord knows we don't want to rush Toby on
No.
Chapter 3 as well, so, yeah.
Crunching is not good. You see, this is why I took so much time to edit this podcast. See, it's reasonable. And once again, you can find all the links to that in the description or in the pin post at patreon.com/WensleydaleCheddar. Send us emails, questions, comments, suggestions at wensleydale012@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter at Podcastmon Manga, or individual Twitters at WensleyCheddar, at Hoven with an H, and at CathmanHenry. Follow the Pink Isle podcast at Pink Isle Pod, I believe.
Yep.
Next time, we'll be covering the Yellow arc, which spans across which chapters? Do you know?
It's volumes 4 to 7.
In the omnibus release, it's 2 and 3 that you want. It starts from chapter 41, but you'll know where it ends because you know what the gold, silver, and crystal protagonist looks like, so you'll be able to tell. It's gonna be fine.
I believe in you, listener.
All right, and thank you very much to you both for coming on the show. This was our first proper episode of Podcastmon Adventures, and it looks like we're blasting off again!
Smell ya later!
For alligator. That was terrible.
Your tar!